as, this laser pointer right here. Okay? I've got a couple more examples here. I do not exist. Well, in order for me to say that, I have to be here, right? So that's just another obvious, inanity. 1 is 2. Well, no, we'll prove it. Well, I don't have to prove it. The law of identity says that 1 is 1, all right? And so here I say 1 is 2. I mean, we all know 1 is not 2, okay? No problem. Now again, I know you're thinking, hello? I mean, how simple is this? And it is, but we'll see later on when I make some other arguments. I mean, people get wrapped around the axles with this, and once you get off the tracks, once you reject reason, well, as Gandalf said to Saruman in the Fellowship of the Ring, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. He asked Saruman, he said, when did Saruman abandon reason for madness? And once you abandon reason, that's all there is madness, is what I'm arguing. Okay, here's 1 is not 1. Well, of course it is, all right? I can't write a word of English or speak a word of English. Well, of course I can because I did it, all right? So the statement contradicts itself. It's false. Good is evil. Okay, now I wish I had a lot more time to talk about this, but this is a fundamental problem that's facing our society today. We violate the law of identity all the time. We call good evil and we call evil good. Okay, so what do we take away from this? Nonsense contradicts itself, and first principles are undeniable. You can't get away from them. You can't escape them. And be rational. Okay? Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about reason and faith. And I want to set this up, before I get into the discussion of logic, which we're going to talk a little bit about logic. This is just a straw man that just has to be burned down. And the straw man is a false argument. And so that's what I'm going to hopefully do over the next remaining hour. Okay, so what is faith? Faith in the 21st century Western civilization is a firm belief in something for which there's no proof. Now, if you go out on www.merriam-webster.com and you type in faith, and you hit the go button, it'll come back up, and under number 2, because they've got more, words can be used in different ways. 1, 2, 3. Under number 2 is this definition: a firm belief in something for which there is no proof. I mean, that's what people today think that faith is. And I'm going to give you a couple examples of that. This is from the book God's Undertaker by John Lennox. It's a really great book. It's just been reprinted in a new edition. And it says, and he's quoting Richard Dawkins here, and he says, faith being belief that isn't based on evidence. In other words, that's what faith is: believing something that's not based on evidence. Is the principal vice of any religion. And actually, I could agree with Dawkins here if you changed the word religion into system of thought, okay, or system of epistemology, because believing something that is not based on evidence is foolish. I mean, we all know that, right? Don't you know that you don't? I mean, if you walked up to get on an airplane, and one of the wings was sort of hanging off, or the engine was smoking, or the pilot was sitting up there, doing shots, or I mean, you would not get on the plane, right? Because you have evidence, all right? So we don't believe in things without evidence. I mean, we just don't. So to say that we do, in the first place, is ridiculous. Here, and I've got famous author down here because this was on a website. I was reading a conversation with this unnamed guy, quoting famous author, who said that faith is that faculty of the mind which allows us to believe in things that we know to be untrue. All right? And this is the only scriptural reference I'm going to make throughout this whole first part of the talks, because I don't want to this is an exercise in pure reason here, what we're going through right now. But I would say, that again, to substitute one word here and make this a true statement, it's rebellion is that faculty of the will, okay, I had to change 2 words, which allows us to believe things that we know to be untrue. And I would refer you to Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 22, so again, this is not faith, this is rebellion. But what's that a violation of? The law of identity, okay? But people don't, get this. James Lee Burke from The Rain Gods, page 520. I love James Lee Burke. He's a fabulous author. He's written tons of great novels about Louisiana. But in this book, and I just recently read it, and it struck me, he says, you're the poet. You have faith in things there's no reason to believe in. Okay, so and I think he's possibly, I get from reading the story, I think he's possibly a Christian author. Okay? So here he's saying something like that. From the movie The Book of Eli. We walk by faith, not by sight. 1 Corinthians, or 2 Corinthians, 1 Corinthians 5:7. We walk by faith, not by sight. And so then what he says, he explains it. It means that you know something even if you don't know something. Well, we know from the law of non-contradiction, right? You can't know and not know. That's nonsense. That's not mystical or deep or spiritual or advanced or sophisticated. It's none of those things. It's irrational. Okay? It doesn't have to make sense. It's faith. So this is what people see. They go to the movie, they see this, they just take it on board. They don't parse it and understand. Now this quote here is from a Christian apologetics website, and I was horrified when I read this, and I corresponded with the guy who in many ways has a great site. But this is what it said. Faith and reason are not enemies. In fact, the exact opposite is true. One is absolutely necessary for the other to exist. And here's the statement that it just fractured me. All reasoning ultimately traces back to faith in something that you cannot prove. Okay? No. That's not it. That's not it. Because we've reason ultimately traces back to things that you can't deny. You can't deny that you exist. You can't deny that you are you. It's not something that just can't be proven, although it can't be proven, remember, because that part of that angle is true, because first principles, after all, cannot be proven. They're axiomatic. That's where we start. That's, first principles with existence and identity. So it doesn't trace back to faith in something that I can't prove. Reason traces back to the reality of first principles that I cannot deny. But this is a Christian apologetics website. Okay? Now what does the New Testament say about faith? The New Testament says that faith is, as best as I can determine, and I've checked this out with a New Testament scholar who's sitting in the audience, because I don't want to say things that aren't true. It's either one, an act of the will. In other words, it's a choice, or it's a body of doctrine or something that is believed based upon reason and evidence. Okay? So New Testament faith has absolutely nothing whatsoever, virtually nothing whatsoever to do with the 21st century word faith. So whenever we're in a conversation with somebody and they talk about faith, and I'll get into this in a second because we're going to start talking about syllogisms and arguments, you have to define your terms. And if you're using terms in two different ways, then there's no communication. There's only misunderstanding and confusion. Okay, so what is reason? Reason is the power of comprehending, inferring, or thinking, especially in orderly and rational ways. I like to think of it as getting from here to there, in terms of conclusions. Where we start, where we end up. It's like a road map. If truth is a journey, then reason is our road map. Okay? And logic is merely the formal principles of reasoning. And there are a lot of other definitions of logic, but that's pretty broad and it's true, so that's what we're going with this morning. Okay, I'm only going to just going to basically wave at induction as we go by. But what inductive reasoning, because there's basically two kinds of reasoning. There's inductive reasoning and there's deductive reasoning. We're going to spend most of our time talking about deductive reasoning here this morning. Inductive reasoning is reasoning from particular sense experience to general truths. And this is what scientists do, okay? You know, they look at data, experimental data, results, physical things, okay? And then they step back and they go, you know, what might explain what I'm seeing, okay? And so then they come up with what's called a hypothesis, you know? And then they design an experiment to test that hypothesis. And then they compare the results that they get with the experiment to the hypothesis. And then, you know, they do it. And once they get that hypothesis refined enough to where it's explaining virtually everything, then it sort of graduates to the status of theory. And if it then, you know,